This is Politics by Jake. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin the show with something uncomfortable. When evil fights evil, sometimes good can result. That's not bloodlust. That is not partisanship. That is historical realism. And the American debate right now about this whole thing, this whatever it is that's going on with Iran, it's shallow. It's poll numbers. It's process complaints. It's cable news theatrics. But the real question is this: can a regime that murdered tens of thousands of its own citizens, not in secret, not in quiet prisons alone, which would be bad enough, but through public hangings in city squares, hoisting bodies from giant construction cranes so that the entire population understands exactly who holds power? Can such a regime be allowed to remain intact as a regional pillar of power? Not repressed, not disciplined, murdered. If you remove Trump from the equation, if you remove party labels, that's the moral axis here, in my opinion. Everything else is secondary. So here at home, we have Trump weekend, and particularly we've got Trump firing Secretary of Homeland Security, the failed former governor of South Dakota, and that's Kristi Noem, or Nome. I always like to call her Gnome with a capital G, but that's another story. She has now been fired as of the end of the month, and she'll be replaced by Markwayne Bullen, because his mother and father couldn't decide whether he should be named Mark or Wayne. So they called him Markwayne. Markwayne Bullen, a Republican senator from, of all places, Oklahoma, a thuggish fellow. And I mean, the thing that stands out for me, my exposure to this guy, and I think several people would tell you this, is at a certain point a couple of years ago, there was a hearing that was being attended by a top official of the team, the Teamsters Union, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the IBT. And this guy was testifying in front of a Senate committee. And this Markwayne Bullen threatened to beat him up. He said, "Why don't we step outside?" And the Teamster guy says, "Yeah, anytime you want." And Bullen did not deliver on this. But this might be to the idea of the sort of continuing hooligan, thuggish, Kakistocracy mentality, which is government that is inhabited by the very most incompetent, the very most mediocre, the very worst kind of people that you would want in government. This hooliganistic, this thuggish mentality, which is typical of Donald Trump and the maggots. And maybe this is a matter of time. Maybe this is an accentuation as the MAGA coalition gets weaker and weaker, which it is. But this is a thing apart, and for right now, for this moment on this show, we have to look at Trump's action on the international level. It's imperative, now that we have attacked, that this succeed. And others seem to be agreeing. We even have Spain sending resources. It's unquestionably true that Trump has, violated the Constitution. I mean, you could make the argument that he violates the Constitution 6 ways from Sunday or 10 times before breakfast. There's a recent article in the New York Times talks about how this is the first president who's ever gotten us into a war where there isn't any public support at the start of it. Only 21% thought it was a good idea to invade Iran, and that's below, by the way, the magic Nixonian mark of 25%, which is a little skewed as far as the percentage interpretation is concerned, because it's talking about his presidency and the approval of his presidency, Nixon that is, but it's not that skewed. If only 21% feel we should have invaded Iran, that's a reflection on the presidency of Donald Trump that needs to be paid attention to. But we also need to pay attention because it's undoubtedly true. All the things that are being said are true. Trump is an autocrat. He's a renegade. He's arguably got frontotemporal dementia, where his frontal temporal lobes are actually shrinking, which is a characteristic of dementia, shrinking in the brain pan. And there's no question that the founding doctrines of this country, honestly sacred, have been violated. But we must also remember this other thing, and this is important also, that when evil fights evil, good can result. And this is all actually the invention of Zbigniew Brzezinski and Jimmy Carter. And I can remember Brzezinski, I remember this, going on television and saying Islamic fundamentalism is the main bulwark against, at that time, Soviet communism. So Brzezinski had developed a tactic of attempting to attack the soft underbelly of the Soviet Union, the 5 stands, one of which was Afghanistan, largely Muslim, by state. He thought this was a pretty clever thing to do. And eventually, he gloried in the fact that he had lured and provoked the Soviets into invading Afghanistan, which in many ways, after 8 years, and then the precipitous withdrawal of the Red Army from Afghanistan under the Gromov Doctrine, which was basically that the Soviets said, listen, they said to the Afghanis, said to the Taliban, listen, we're leaving, and they didn't negotiate anything. They said, just don't shoot us on the way out. And they contacted the United States, and they said, don't give them any more Stinger missiles so that they shoot down our helicopters and our jets. And that was it. That was the only negotiation. And they left. And that set into motion the collapse of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Gorbachev regime at the end of 1991. So it was, really a geopolitical trick by Brzezinski, but he failed to plan ahead enough in order to realize what this might be. So that's why there is this so-called Islamic Republic that we have now. And notice, please, that the Islamic Republic is not an authentic, organic product of the Iranian Persian civilization or anything of the sort. It's a creation of the Western intelligence agencies. And above all, Brzezinski, who was rubber-stamped by Carter, who knew nothing of these things. Actually, Brzezinski really knew nothing of this region himself, and Carter, didn't. So, we had, I guess, we had the blind leading the blind, and that's how you got this thing. Brzezinski felt it was an absolute positive bulwark against communism, and he used to crow about this. So I don't know what we can say about that kind of a doctrine when even evil fights evil. And it's not just a government. It's a layered power structure. It's a formal state apparatus. It has a president, nominally. It has a parliament. It has a judiciary. But above that, the supreme leader is an unelected sovereign in security and in doctrine. And alongside that, you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And at this point, let's take a break. And we'll have a commercial message or two, and we'll be back. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious, it's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Okay, this is Politics by Jake, and we are back, and we are talking. So we were talking about the Islamic Republic and, what it's like. And we kind of ended talking about the supreme leader who's unelected. There's a president, there's a parliament, ostensibly, all of this, and a judiciary. And above that, there's the supreme leader, and he's unelected, and he's sovereign in security and doctrine. And alongside that, you have something called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the IRGC. And the IRGC was formed after the 1979 revolution to protect the revolution from internal and external enemies. And over time, it metastasized like cancer. And it now controls ballistic missile programs. It oversees the Quds Force foreign operations. It runs proxy militias across the Middle East, and we're going to talk about that. It controls major construction conglomerates. It owns telecommunications infrastructure. It has influence and oil and gas contracts. And it operates intelligence and counterintelligence units. It's not just a military branch anymore, no siree. It's an ideological oligarchy. And its military arm, the Basij, functions as a mobilized civilian enforcement corps. Kind of when you jokingly talk about the morality police, only these guys are that. Their ideological street muscle. When protests erupted, the IRGC did not hesitate. We are not talking about rubber bullets. We are talking about live fire, mass arrests, disappearances, executions, public hangings, visible, theatrical, deliberate. And the point of public execution, you see, it's not justice. It's fear. It's terror. It's domination. And that's what must be dismantled. And now you have this Islamic Republic, and it's lashing out in all directions. In the immediate context of this, we've had at least 30,000 Iranian protesters lose their lives, massacred by this savage, odious regime. And I would say truly, hell and night have brought a monstrous birth to light when this happened. They're flailing out in all directions. It's going to be very important to do regime change. Donald Trump said 30,000, 32,000, something like that. The Peacock Prince, who is the he's the heir to the Shah of Iran, who's dead. And it talks about constitutional monarchy every once in a while. He said the figure is 40,000 dead. The Iranians have gone berserk. They've attacked something like as many as 16 countries. They've attacked Cyprus. They've attacked Turkey. And those are both members of NATO. And that activates Article 5. And the British, who originally said they weren't going to do anything about this, are now sending help. Spain is sending help. The Netherlands is sending help. So we've got the United States, as far as co-belligerents are concerned. We've got Britain. We've got France. We've got Germany. We've got Italy. We have the Netherlands. Even Spain, like I said, in spite of their loud protests, seem to be sending some military assets, because whatever you think of the initial U.S.-Israeli onslaught against Iran and the killing of the Ayatollah Khamenei, who I think is, really one of the great monsters of recent history, whatever you think of that, you'd have to agree that lashing out against every country, from Turkey all the way to Oman, the Azeris, and so forth, and the list gets longer and longer. It's crazy. So as I said, you have Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter, Cold War strategist, Polish-born intellectual, deep hostility towards Soviet expansionism. He identified the Soviet Union's soft underbelly, this Muslim Republic of Central Asia, the stands. And his theory was activate Islamic identity to destabilize atheistic communist rule, and it worked tactically. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan, 8 years of attrition, withdrawal, collapse of Soviet legitimacy, short-term success, long-term blowback. And then you have this fellow named Ali Shariati, which is, weird, because his name, the first 2, 4, 6, 7 letters of his name spells Sharia, the oppressive law of Islam. So Ali Shariati, Iranian intellectual, educated partly in Paris, absorbed Marxist theory, dialectic, class struggle, workers of the world unite, that sort of thing, anti-colonial rhetoric, and he fused it with Shiite martyrdom symbolism and came up with something called Islamic Marxism. Revolution sanctified, oppression framed as cosmic struggle, clerical authority positioned as emancipatory force. And this is the fusion that produced the Islamic Republic, not purely religious, not purely Marxist, but it's a hybrid. It's theology fused with revolutionary authoritism. I talk about conservatism sometimes, American conservatism, and I say it's really not organic. It's just some made-up stuff. It's made-up Ayn Rand stuff, and not to get too far off the subject, but just to draw a parallel, it's from the Mount Pelerin School, and it goes back to the 1940s, and it has in it Ayn Rand stuff. It has a bunch of free market stuff. It's like a Frankenstein monster, and that's what the Islamic Republic is. That's the fusion that built the IRGC. And that fusion exports instability. And I was going to get going on something else, but at this point, let's take a little break. We'll go back, we'll do a commercial or two, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about this more because there's a lot more to talk about. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Okay, and this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. So the question arises with Trump, arguendo, which means for the sake of the argument, acting unconstitutionally. We'll be talking more about him. What can be done? What must be done? See, this is the problem. And if I may venture afield a little bit here, my assertion is that now this conflict has been forced upon us, and increasingly the world, and I wouldn't at all, as justification for many in the world, look askance at any allegations about persons, like in the book of Daniel. When Daniel sees the vision, he sees people who want to force the vision, an interpretation of the vision, on either side. The crazed evangelical Christian community that follows essentially, in the world, basically follows essentially what I consider to be a Constantinian, Constantine version of Christianity, which ignores the other message. And of course, you understand that all these scriptures that we call the Bible, they went through the two councils. One was Nicaea. The other one I can't remember, but the other one is arguably more important, where you have Jesus saying things like the kingdom of heaven is within you, and that prominent but not very well-known scripture, but it's the big, very important scripture, where he is contending with the Pharisees, or the Pharisees are contending with him. And he prominently and most notably says, does it not say, because they're mad at him, because he's implying or he's saying outright that he's the Son of God. And he says, does it not say in your very own scriptures that I said ye are gods? And that in part, as far as I'm concerned, as far as Christianity is concerned, that's the part that frees you right there. But unfortunately, the evangelicals are paying attention, to the other Constantinian method, which is oppressive in my opinion, and which is something that I could never, even though I did have, Jake had his religious phase, which many people do at one time or another, could never reconcile. And certainly not the apocalyptic meanderings of either the Christian evangelicals or the apocalyptic meanderings, whatever they are, of the Iranian mullahs. So, all right, Iran has these proxies that I call it the 4-H club. I think members in Congress, some of them are beginning to call it the 4-H club also. The Houthis you have, they're the ones that are trying to close down the shipping. You have Hezbollah, which also begins with an H. And these are, like I said, these are a club, arguably, of Iranian satellites. Hezbollah is one of these. Hamas is one of these. That begins with an H. So you have the Houthis, you have Hamas, you have Hezbollah, and Iran told Hezbollah to attack Israel. And like fools, they did it. And now the Israelis are pounding holy hell out of Lebanon. But this is just more of what I said, the Iranians. And this is why I talk about it as possibly and frame it as the apocalyptic, which means end time. And the apocalypse is actually supposed to be the revelation of end time things, and it deals with end time events. And there's in Christianity, you have those who talk about the book of Revelation, they talk about the book of Daniel, and they talk about Matthew 25 because there are predictions in there that they have. And I'm sure that the mullahs and the ayatollahs of Islam also have those things too. And that's why I said it's like they're trying to create an apocalyptic vision using an isolated scripture like one of the scriptures from the book of Daniel as a justification for it. But they're flailing out in all directions, so it's important for them. Regime change is going to be necessary. You can't have a government where the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, which is the modern day Gestapo of that government, you can't allow a government, assuming that, this, whenever this is over, you can't allow a government to be reinstalled there where these people have murdered their own people, and yet they're allowed to continue to govern the people. You see the point I'm making here? We've reached a point, whether you like it or not. I understand. 21% of Americans like it. The other 79% of Americans don't. But we've reached a point where whether you like it or not, this cannot be allowed to stand. And I talked with production staff about bringing this up because some people said it might be misunderstood, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because the things that have happened to the Iranian people, they've killed their own people. And I want to kind of try to portray that by talking about this great scene in this movie called Fury with Brad Pitt and several other really good actors. And Fury is an American tank. It's, I think, an M4A Sherman. It's an M4, some variation of a Sherman. Some of the Shermans had heavier guns. I don't know whether this is the one that had the 77 millimeter gun, anyone, but it's an M4 tank. And it's full of action for all of those of you who like war movies where the Americans win. That's really fun. But this is actually a pretty good movie. And in it, Fury it's an American tank. And it's part of an American detail that has basically taken over a German town. And people are being let out of this building. And children were in the building, school children. And they come out. And they've been held hostage. And as you look at it, in just a moment, you will see why. Because there's a Gestapo officer in there. Apparently some of them, these children, had been killed by hanging. An awful, terrible thing for the other children to witness. These were just school children. And don't you doubt that the Nazis in real life did just these very things. These awful, barbarous inhumanities to not merely their fellow men, but to their progeny, to the seed corn of the nation, just school children. And Brad Pitt's character speaks German. And he knows that this has happened because he was on the scene. He's the commander of one of the tanks, and he's been talking to a teacher whose class was held hostage in this building, who had also been taken hostage, now been released. And he asked, because one of the guys coming out is obviously a uniformed member of the Gestapo. He's uniformed just like them. And he has this lean and hungry look. He was well cast. He has this lean and hungry look. Remember Shakespeare talked about the lean and hungry look? Just like I imagine the senators who put the wind through Julius Caesar, if you take my meaning. And he's in the manner of surrendering, dutifully surrendering. He's holding up some white piece of paper, which I don't know, maybe his military ID or something. And Brad Pitt's character knows what has happened. And he asks the teacher character, is this the guy who hanged the children? Because he had taken them hostage in the building and they wanted to leave. And he said if anyone left the building, he was going to hang them. And he hanged some of them to terrorize the rest into compliance. And the teacher looks at him and says, yeah, which of course means yes. And to make a long story short, in the scene, you see that Brad Pitt character separates the Gestapo man and does not allow him to proceed. And in the end, he's summarily executed by machine gunning. And if you watch that scene and understand and comprehend the horror and the terror of it that was inflicted by the Nazis, who were Germans, upon an advanced, enlightened, scientific, literate population who fell under the spell of this nutjob Adolf Hitler and his fascist cabal, so that in the end they were committing atrocities upon their own civilian population, not merely the adult citizens, but innocent school children. If you understand that, then you understand that that is why something like this must occur. There must be a Nuremberg or Truth and Reconciliation or some kind of tribunal. And the government must be replaced. Because these people that are in control now, that have attacked 16 nations, these people did what the Nazis did. They killed their own people. They killed tens of thousands of their own people, and they cannot, must not be allowed to participate in a successor government. It's absolute insanity. It must not. It cannot be allowed. Now, interestingly, we have a report that various parts of the Iranian police, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, this kind of SS, Schutzstaffel SS of the Iranian regime, and perhaps parts of the army and other officials are not showing up for work. In other words, a certain disintegration of the Iranian state apparatus is observable. And that, of course, is exactly what the progress of world civilization needs. Because it's no exaggeration to say, and I could, talk more about this. I'm actually not looking at the clock. I don't know how much time I have left in the show. But it's no exaggeration to say that the Ayatollahs and the mullahs and the regime that they have created, including this Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC, and the Quds Force, spelled Quds, and so forth, the former bailiwick of the late Soleimani, who was killed, that these people are the negation of civilization itself. They are enemies of civilization, period. So that's important to bring in. It's important to be aware of that. I guess the official U.S. version, like I said, Trump in the State of the Union said 32. He said 32,000 Iranian protesters murdered by the IRGC, Quds Force and Basij, the morality police. And the Basij, I guess we've said the IRGC is the equivalent of the Nazi SS, the Schutzstaffel, the black shirts or black suits, I guess they had. And those were a kind of elite corps of ideologues. And the Basij look a whole lot more like the SA, which is the 20th century Sturmabteilung, or storm detail, the brown shirts, who are the original street fighters, and they were led by a monster. Hitler was a monster, but there was no shortage of monsters in the Nazi regime, and one of them was Ernst Röhm, R-O-H-M. It has a little umlaut, the little two dots above the O that changed the spelling. And these helped Hitler fight his way to the top of German society, and then Hitler turned on them because of their extravagant demands, I guess, and they were liquidated in something called the night, and you can look it up, it's called the Night of the Long Knives in June of 1934. It's just a year and a half into the regime. Hitler basically took over and gained complete power in 1933. And in 1934, he had to get rid of these guys. And that is what enforces the regime of these ayatollahs and those mullahs, the IRGC. They're there, and they need to be broken up. And at this point, let's take a break. We've gone a little long, want to get another commercial in, and then we'll be back. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious, it's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, and thank you very much, Twain Consulting. And this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. So, all right, let's talk about some other things. Iran is not isolated. It's embedded in a broader authoritarian alignment. Russia, China, North Korea. Iran supplies drones to Russia. Russia supplies air defense systems to Iran. And China purchases roughly 80% of Iranian oil exports, often discounted, often routed through gray channels in order to avoid sanction. North Korea shares missile technology patterns. This is not accidental cooperation. This is structural alignment. And withdrawal without strategy strengthens that bloc. And this is talking about how we must see this through. We must win this. Escalation without discipline, on the other hand, destabilizes everything. But let's just talk a little bit more about this. The successor, the Iranian government, and I was talking about this in the last segment, needs to be broken up. It cannot have a part in the new government. And the successor to the Shah, that one must also not be allowed to take control of the government, the old peacock throne. I say this occurred just over 1 or 2 nights, and it's just one of the bloodbaths where this awful regime has killed and murdered its own people. And the idea is that knowing this, you cannot simply say that this fight is not worth fighting. So in other words, a kind of denazification process must occur in Iran, truth and reconciliation, or some kind of Nuremberg type tribunal. And I might add, this is the very thing that needs to occur and must occur in the United States with the present administration. We're not talking about that now, but we'll address that on another show. The excesses of Kristi Noem with a G, for example, to say nothing of others. The formalism of positive law doesn't work here, because this is something that has already happened. 40,000 people killed over 1 or 2 nights. And some of the figures are as high as 92,000. It's kind of tough. The mullahs, this present regime, they're butchers. You cannot argue formalistically in situations like this. International law, it has to be tempered by other realities. What you mean, you're not going to be allowed to kill one of the greatest butchers of modern time, Khamenei, and of course he's dead. Or Soleimani, who was killed in 2020, and his mullah fascist cabal. Daniel Webster argues that in order to do this is back in 1837, you have to have something that's absolutely imminent. But when you have a plain intention expressed to kill you, you are justified in not waiting, but in taking action to defuse the threat. Okay, so let's talk about Trump for a little bit. Trump is unfit for office. Let's be explicit, okay? Civil liability for sexual assault. Basically a rapist. 34 felony convictions. An enormous amount of references. Senator Ted Lieu, the other day, said that there are documents in the Epstein files that talk about him raping children. Listen, this needs to be talked about. I'm not the first one that brought this up. I'm just bringing it to your attention. These things alone disqualify him morally. But beyond that, he's mismatched to geopolitics. He's to transactionalists. He's not structural. Transactional thinking means treating NATO like a dues club. You're not paying your dues. You need to pay up. Typical money grubbing, nickel nursing, penny pinching Queen's landlord, just like his dad. Suggesting that alliances are contingent upon personal loyalty. This is transactional thinking, rather than to the Constitution, rather than to NATO and the treaties we've got. Publicly undermining intelligence agencies, praising autocrats while antagonizing democratic partners. He loves Putin. Trump has this insatiable desire to insult and provoke allies. And he has this unnatural and weird longing and desire to appease Putin. I frequently call him a doofus. Others call him a fool. Incompetent, of course, which he is. But the important epistemological thing here is to separate world historical necessity of overthrowing the Iranian regime from Trump. We know Trump. We have to separate that from Trump. Trump is the most celebrated, the most infamous liar of the age. We know that Trump has an attention span which is asymptotically approaching zero. He falls asleep in meetings all the time. He cannot be relied upon. We know that he is ultimately incapable of functioning as a war president, partly because he suffers from a mental impairment, as I said. He's very likely suffering from frontal temporal dementia, cognitive decline. His brain is actually shrinking in the brain pan. He has cognitive decline. He has weak-minded approaches to things. He's full of contempt for any kind of methodological or methodical preparation, for anything like facts or study, debriefing books. He doesn't care about those. He has a severely truncated attention span. He is afflicted above all by obsessive greed. And actually at this point, this might be his ruling passion. I recall the speech in 2015 or 2016 when he's up on the stage and he's saying, all my life, all I knew is that I had to get everything that I could get. And he raises his arms and his hands outstretched with fingers outstretched, and he's pulling them back to himself as if he's grabbing for all that he can. All I know, all I remember is that from the very first, I had to get everything that I could get. Obsessive greed. He's also never been far, from the thought of how to appease Putin. He seems to function, Putin that is, as his master, his mentor, his master's voice, his North Star. But geopolitics requires coalition cohesion. It requires predictable signaling. It requires long-term deterrence architecture. It requires institutional trust. Trump doesn't care about this stuff. He prefers spectacle. He thrives on disruption. He installs what I refer to as kakistoi. Of course, I'm just showing off when I say that, because kakistoi is a Greek word. It's an ancient Greek word. It refers to the worst, the least qualified, the most incompetent and abysmal people that you could ever think of into posts of authority, like Kristi Noem with a G, Stephen Miller with an S, SM, Stephen Miller, SM, get it? All right, okay. Never mind malignant narcissism, which it said he also has too. Never mind credible concern about frontotemporal cognitive decline, literal shrinkage of the frontal lobes, which affects impulse control and executive function. Even if you bracket personality, transactional improvisation in a structural environment, it's dangerous. But here's the layered truth. The IRGC's murder apparatus, the control of the mullahs and the ayatollahs, who have now attacked 16 actors, that's not going away. That does not dissolve merely because Trump is unfit. We have to realize that reality is it's labored. Remember what Obi-Wan Kenobi said? Disgusted to Anakin Skywalker, who had become Darth Vader. You want to take over my empire. Remember that? Remember what he shouted to Obi-Wan? And Obi-Wan was disgusted with him. And what did he say? He said only the Sith deal in absolutes. And of course, the Sith in Star Wars are the great scourge of the galaxy. And I would add a logical addition here. Only the Sith deal in absolutes, and only absolutists think in binaries. You can condemn Trump and still recognize structural necessity. Both are true. And at this point, let's take another break, and this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back.
Think again. In today's world, lawsuits, taxes, and predators are everywhere. That's why the smart money hides in plain sight. We help you to build legal firewalls, LLCs, land trusts, private contracts that protect your assets while keeping you invisible. Call Twain Consulting today at 310-997-2204. Find us on Facebook at Twain Consulting. That's facebook.com/Twain Consulting. Protect what you've built before someone else takes it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
Okay, thank you, Twain Consulting, as usual, and we are back. And let's talk about the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, because I said the Shah shouldn't come back. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Western-backed monarch after the 1953 coup, he modernized aggressively. There was industrialization, there was women's suffrage, there was secular education, but his secret police, the Savak, was feared. Surveillance networks, interrogation chambers, torture allegations widely documented, disappearances, political dissent was crushed. Modernization without political legitimacy breeds backlash. That's why he fell. The peacock throne symbolizes the Persian monarchy, imperial continuity. His son, Reza Pahlavi, also named, advocates constitutional monarchy from exile. But nostalgia, not reconstruction. Iran cannot revert to monarchy. Now let's talk for a minute about Gamal Abdel Nasser. He was an Egyptian military officer, and you might say, why are we talking about him? He was an Egyptian military officer. He overthrew monarchy. He was a secular nationalist. He nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956. Wow, that really made the British mad. And he used canal revenues because he charged them to go through. He used those revenues to help finance the Aswan High Dam. And why did this matter? Before the dam, the Nile flooded annually. It had always done that. Too much flood, villages were destroyed. Farmland was washed out. Livestock were drowned. Too little flood, drought, famine, crop failure, unpredictability defined agricultural life. The dam regulated the water flow. It stored the excess floodwater. It released controlled irrigation. It generated hydroelectric power. People had electricity. This enabled industrialization, stabilized agricultural cycles. That is modernization in physical form. That's what's called eudaimotic legitimation. Concrete, steel, electricity, not theological rhetoric. That's the model that Iran needs. Secular governance, development metrics, infrastructure, education, not clerical supremacy. So this is not about war enthusiasm. It's about whether a regime that executed its own citizens publicly, deliberately, can be allowed to remain a pillar of an authoritarian bloc. History punishes illusion. If we collapse into binaries like the Sith, if we allow personality to eclipse structure, if we refuse long horizon thinking, the cost will not be rhetorical. It will be generational. And this is Politics by Jake.